Imagine you need surgery. A tumor must come out, a shattered leg must be amputated. Now imagine there is no anesthetic, none. You will be awake for all of it. Held down by strong men, fully conscious, feeling every cut, every saw, every stitch. This was the reality of surgery for the entire history of the human race, until one single afternoon in 1846 changed it forever. It's almost impossible for us to comprehend now, in a world of painless dentistry and routine operations. But for thousands of years, surgery meant torture that happened to be therapeutic. And the story of how we escaped it, the discovery of anesthesia, is one of the most important and most human in the history of medicine. To feel the weight of what changed, we have to sit for a moment with the horror of what came before, because the world before anesthesia is genuinely hard to imagine. Surgery was the treatment of absolute last resort, attempted only when the alternative was certain death, because the operation itself was a trauma few wished to endure. Patients would put it off for as long as humanly possible, sometimes choosing to die of their disease rather than face the knife awake. When surgery could not be avoided, the patient was brought in and strong assistants took their positions, because their job was to hold the patient down by force for the entire operation. There might be a leather strap, a wooden bit to bite, a swig of whiskey, or a dose of opium that dulled the edges, but came nowhere close to stopping the pain. And then the surgeon began. The patient felt everything, the incision, the sawing of bone, the tugging and cutting deep in living flesh. Operating theaters were known for the screams. It was, by every account, a scene of unspeakable suffering, endured fully conscious, sometimes for many minutes, that must have felt like hours. Because of this, a surgeon's single most prized skill was not precision, it was speed. The faster you could operate, the less the patient suffered, and the better their chance of surviving the shock. Great surgeons were, above all, fast surgeons. The most famous of these speed surgeons was a Scotsman named Robert Liston, who could amputate a leg in under 30 seconds. 30 seconds, from first cut to finished thump. He was a marvel of the era, and the very fact that amputating a leg in 30 seconds was the height of surgical achievement tells you everything about how desperate the situation was. Speed came at a cost. Working that fast, in that chaos, surgeons made mistakes. There's a story, possibly embellished, but telling, of Liston amputating so furiously that he took off a patient's leg, 2 of his assistant's fingers, and slashed a spectator's coat. The patient and the assistant both died of infection, the spectator of fright. The only operation in history, it's said, with a 300% mortality rate. Whether or not that particular tale is exactly true, the underlying reality is not exaggerated. Surgery was brutal, rushed, and limited. A surgeon could only do what could be done in a minute or two on a screaming patient. Delicate, careful, deep, or lengthy operations were simply impossible. The pain itself was a wall around what medicine could do. And here's the thing that makes the whole story so poignant. The means to end this suffering had, in a sense, been hiding in plain sight for decades. Certain gases and vapors, well known to chemists, had the power to render a person insensible to pain. But nobody had put it to use in surgery. The key was in the lock. No one had turned it. There was ether, a volatile liquid whose vapor, when inhaled, caused giddiness and unconsciousness. And there was nitrous oxide, which chemists had nicknamed laughing gas for the euphoria it produced. Both had been known since the late 1700s. Both could knock a person out, and for decades they were treated mostly as entertainment. This is one of the strangest chapters in medical history. In the early 1800s, inhaling ether or laughing gas became a popular recreational amusement. At ether frolics and laughing gas parties, young people, including medical students, would inhale the vapors to get intoxicated, giggling and stumbling around for fun. And at these parties, the clue was right there for anyone paying attention. People under the influence would bang into furniture, fall down, injure themselves, and feel no pain at all until the gas wore off. The anesthetic power was on full display at parties for years. It just took someone to connect "this stops pain" with "surgery causes pain." The people best placed to make that connection were, interestingly, not surgeons, but dentists. Because dentists faced the pain problem constantly, unconscious patients for procedures that were painful but not life-threatening. A dentist had every incentive in the world to find a way to numb their patients, and it was dentists who would crack it. The first to seriously try was a Connecticut dentist named Horace Wells. In 1844, Wells attended a laughing gas demonstration, watched a man gash his leg badly while intoxicated and feel nothing, and had his flash of insight. This gas could make dental extractions painless. He even tested it on himself, having a colleague pull one of his own teeth while he inhaled nitrous oxide. It worked. He felt nothing. Convinced he'd found something world-changing, Wells arranged a public demonstration in 1845 at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston before an audience of medical men. He would extract a tooth from a patient under nitrous oxide painlessly and prove it to the world. It was his moment, and it went horribly wrong. The patient, perhaps not given enough gas, cried out during the extraction. The audience jeered. "Humbug," they shouted. "A fraud, a fake." Wells was humiliated, driven from the hall in disgrace. His idea was right, but his demonstration had failed, and he was branded a charlatan. It was a catastrophe from which he never really recovered. But in that audience, or close to it, was a former business partner and fellow dentist of Wells, a driven, ambitious young man named William Thomas Green Morton. Morton had seen the promise in the idea. And where Wells had used nitrous oxide, Morton would turn to a more powerful vapor, ether. William Morton was determined to succeed where Wells had failed. He began experimenting with ether. On animals, on himself, in his dental practice, ether was stronger and, handled right, could reliably render a patient unconscious long enough for a procedure. Morton, guided in part by a chemist named Charles Jackson, worked to master the dose and the delivery. In the autumn of 1846, Morton began using ether on his dental patients, pulling teeth painlessly. Word started to spread of the Boston dentist who could extract teeth without agony. Encouraged, Morton set his sights on a far bigger stage, not a tooth, but real surgery, before the most respected surgeons in the city. He approached the same institution where Wells had been humiliated, Massachusetts General Hospital, and its senior surgeon, the eminent John Collins Warren. Morton asked for the chance to demonstrate his preparation during a real operation. Warren, intrigued despite the risk to his reputation, agreed. A date was set, October 16, 1846. Now, Morton had a secret, and it reveals a tension that runs through this whole story. He wanted to profit from his discovery. So he tried to disguise what his anesthetic actually was, dyeing the ether, adding aromatics, and calling the mystery preparation Lethion, after the mythical river of forgetfulness. He intended to patent it and control it. This instinct, to own and monetize a technique that could relieve the suffering of all humanity, would later cause enormous controversy and contribute to Morton's downfall. But on the morning of October 16, all of that lay in the future. What mattered was whether the vapor would work in front of a skeptical audience, on a real patient, under the knife. The operating theater at Mass General was a steep amphitheater of wooden benches rising around a central table, a room now so famous it's called, simply, the Ether Dome. On that October morning, it filled with surgeons, students, and skeptics, many of whom remembered Wells's fiasco the year before. They expected, quite possibly, another humbug. The patient was a young man named Edward Gilbert Abbott, who had a vascular growth on the left side of his neck below the jaw that needed to be removed. He was brought in and seated. The surgeon, Warren, stood ready with his instruments. Everyone waited for Morton, and Morton was late. The minutes ticked by. Morton had been delayed, reportedly finishing a last-minute modification to his inhaling apparatus. As the audience grew restless and Warren's patience thinned, the surgeon reportedly turned to the crowd and remarked, dryly, that Morton had apparently been detained. He picked up his knife, preparing to operate the old way. And then Morton burst in. Morton apologized, produced his glass inhaler filled with ether-soaked sponge, and turned to the patient. He held the apparatus to Abbott's face and told him to breathe. Abbott inhaled the sweet, pungent vapor. And slowly, as the room watched in tense silence, the young man drifted into unconsciousness. After a few minutes, Morton turned to the surgeon and said the quiet words that would change medicine. "Sir, your patient is ready." John Collins Warren stepped forward. This was the test. He took his scalpel and made the incision into Abbott's neck, a cut that should have produced a scream, a thrashing, the familiar agony. And Abbott did not move. He did not cry out. He lay still and silent as the surgeon cut into his living flesh. The patient felt nothing. You have to understand what the audience was witnessing. Every person in that room had spent their careers amid the screens of the operating table. It was the unquestioned background of surgery. And now, before their eyes, a man was being cut open, and lying there as peacefully as if asleep. It was, quite literally, unbelievable. Some must have wondered if it were a trick. Warren worked, removing the growth from Abbott's neck, while the patient remained insensible. And when it was done, Abbott gradually came to groggy, but reporting that he had felt no pain, only perhaps some dull sensation. The operation had been performed, and the patient had not suffered. It had worked. It had actually worked. John Collins Warren, the eminent surgeon, deeply moved and perhaps a little stunned, turned to his audience of skeptics. And he delivered one of the most famous lines in the history of medicine, a direct, deliberate rebuke to the jeering that had greeted Wells the year before. He said, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug. No humbug, not a trick, not a fraud, not a party gimmick, a real, reliable way to abolish the pain of surgery." In that moment, in that room, on that afternoon of October 16, 1846, thousands of years of surgical agony came to an end. The date is remembered ever since, simply as Ether Day. And the news did not stay in that room. It exploded outward with a speed that was astonishing for the era. Because unlike so many discoveries, this one needed no theory to accept. You simply demonstrated it, and the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. A person cut who did not scream. Within weeks, the news crossed the Atlantic. Ether anesthesia was performed in London that December, barely 2 months after Ether Day. From there, it spread across Europe and around the globe with breathtaking speed. Within months, surgeons on multiple continents were operating on patients who felt nothing. A single afternoon in Boston had rewritten surgery everywhere. Think about how fast that was. In a world before telephones, before airplanes, before the internet. News traveled by ship and letter and word of mouth, and still this idea circled the planet in months. That's how desperately the world had needed it, and how instantly its value was recognized. Humanity had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this. Soon after ether, another anesthetic joined it. In Scotland, an obstetrician named James Young Simpson began using chloroform, which acted faster and smelled less harsh. Chloroform spread quickly too, especially for childbirth, famously used by Queen Victoria herself for the birth of her children, which helped make anesthesia respectable and popular. In just a few years, the unthinkable had become the standard. Surgery without anesthesia, the norm for all of human history, became unthinkable in the other direction, a barbarity of the past. No surgeon would dream of operating on a conscious patient again. An entire dimension of human suffering had simply been switched off. And this didn't just spare patients pain, though that alone would be one of the great gifts in human history. It fundamentally transformed what surgery could be. Remember, before anesthesia, surgeons were limited to what they could do in seconds on a screaming patient. Speed was everything, and that capped what was possible. With anesthesia, that limit vanished. Now a surgeon could take their time. They could work slowly, carefully, precisely. They could go deeper into the body, perform longer and more delicate operations, and think as they worked rather than race against a patient's agony. Anesthesia didn't just remove pain. It unlocked the future of surgery itself. Operations that had been impossible became routine. The interior of the abdomen, the chest, eventually the brain and the heart, regions no surgeon could have explored on a conscious, thrashing patient, gradually opened up. Nearly all of modern surgery, from appendectomies to transplants to open-heart operations, rests on the foundation laid that afternoon in the Ether Dome. Anesthesia had a crucial partner too. A couple of decades after Ether Day, Joseph Lister introduced antiseptic technique, killing the germs that turned so many operations fatal with infection. Anesthesia removed the pain, antisepsis removed the deadly infection. Together, in the second half of the 1800s, they transformed surgery from a desperate gamble into a genuine, reliable branch of medicine. So the afternoon in the Ether Dome wasn't just a moment of mercy. It was a hinge in medical history, the point where surgery began its transformation from a brutal last resort into the sophisticated, life-saving discipline we know today. Every surgery you or anyone you love has ever had painlessly traces back to Edward Abbott lying still on that table. You would think a discovery this momentous would have brought its makers happiness, wealth, and lasting honor. That is one of the many things they deserve. It is not, tragically, what most of them got. Because almost as soon as Ether's success was undeniable, an ugly, ruinous fight broke out over who deserved the credit and the money. The problem began with Morton's instinct to profit. He had tried to hide the fact that his lithium was simply ether, a common, cheap chemical that any pharmacist could obtain. But of course the secret didn't hold. Doctors quickly realized what lithium really was, and many were outraged at the very idea of patenting and profiting from the relief of human suffering. And once the anesthetic was revealed to be plain ether, known for decades, used at parties, no secret at all, the question of who really invented surgical anesthesia became a vicious free-for-all. Because if it was just ether, then arguably many people had a claim, and several stepped forward to make one. There was Morton, who had performed the famous public demonstration. There was Charles Jackson, the chemist who had advised Morton, and now claimed the underlying idea was his. There was Horace Wells, who had pioneered anesthesia with nitrous oxide first, before his humiliating failure. And there was a fourth man from Georgia, with perhaps the strongest claim of all and the worst luck. His name was Crawford Long, a country doctor in rural Georgia. And here's the twist: Crawford Long had used ether to painlessly remove a tumor from a patient back in March of 1842, more than 4 years before Ether Day. He had genuinely done it first. But he practiced in an isolated rural town, he didn't grasp the world-changing scale of it, and Fatefully, he didn't publish his results until years later. By the time Wong published in 1849, the world had already credited Boston. His priority was real but invisible, a discovery made and then left silent while others later took the stage and the fame. It's a hard lesson that echoes through science. Being first isn't enough. You have to tell the world. Long did the deed, Morton did the demonstration, and history remembered the demonstration. So, who deserves the credit for anesthesia? Honestly, all of them, in different ways. Long did it first. Wells pioneered the concept and paid the price for a failed demonstration. Morton made it undeniable and launched it into the world. Jackson contributed chemical knowledge. It was, like so many discoveries, a collective achievement, which is exactly why the fight over sole credit was so bitter and so destructive. And destructive it was. The priority dispute consumed years, spilled into lawsuits and public feuds, and, heartbreakingly, helped destroy the lives of the very men who had given humanity one of its greatest gifts. The end of pain and surgery led for its discoverers to a great deal of pain of another kind. Let's trace what became of them, because it's a sobering coda to a triumphant story. The timeline of anesthesia's discovery is also, sadly, a timeline of ruin. Here is that arc, laid end to end, from the quiet first use in Georgia, through the glorious morning in the Ether Dome, to the tragedies that followed. Horace Wells, the dentist who pioneered anesthesia with laughing gas and was jeered as a humbug, never recovered from that public humiliation and the credit fight that followed. He fell into experimenting on himself with chloroform, became addicted, and grew increasingly unstable. In early 1848, in a chloroform-induced haze, he committed a crime, was arrested, and jailed in New York. In his jail cell, in January 1848, in despair, Horace Wells took his own life. He was just 33 years old. He died believing himself a failure, not knowing that history would recognize him as one of the true pioneers of anesthesia. Ironically, just days after his death, a medical society in Paris formally credited him as the discoverer. The recognition came too late for him to ever know it. William Morton, the man of the famous demonstration, spent the rest of his life fighting for the patent that was never honored, for money that never came, for the sole credit that others contested at every turn. He grew bitter and financially ruined, consumed by the endless dispute. In 1868, at the age of 48, worn down by years of struggle, he died suddenly, poor and embittered. Charles Jackson, the chemist who claimed the discovery was really his, spent decades pressing his case and feuding with Morton. In his later years, he suffered a stroke and spent his final years in an asylum where he died. For a long time, the story was told that the anesthesia feud had literally driven him mad, though modern historians think the stroke, not the dispute, was the medical cause. Either way, his end was a sad one. And Crawford Long, who had actually used ether first back in 1842, he, at least, avoided the worst of the ruin. He continued his quiet rural medical practice in Georgia. But he never received in his lifetime the full credit for having been the true first. His priority was acknowledged only gradually, and mostly after his death. The man who did it first was the man history noticed last. 4 men, 4 claims, 4 difficult fates, bound together by a discovery that should have brought them nothing but honor. It's one of the darker ironies in the history of science that the abolition of surgical pain caused so much personal anguish for those who brought it about. The gift blessed the world and cursed its givers. Why did it go so wrong? Partly, the trouble began with the attempt to own and profit from something that arguably belonged to all of humanity. The moment anesthesia became a matter of patents and money and sole credit, it became a thing to be fought over rather than shared. There's a lesson in that about how we handle discoveries that could relieve universal suffering. And partly, it went wrong because credit in science is genuinely messy. Anesthesia had no single inventor. It emerged from many hands. The chemists who discovered the gases, the partygoers who unknowingly demonstrated their effects, the dentists who saw the application, the surgeon who staked his reputation on a demonstration. Trying to award it all to one person was always going to be unjust and destructive. Perhaps the fairest way to see it is this: anesthesia was discovered by humanity over decades through the contributions of many. Ether Day is rightly remembered as the pivotal public moment, the day it became undeniable and unstoppable. But it was a culmination, not a single act of genius. And the people who made it possible all deserve our gratitude, whatever the ugliness that followed. Because whatever the human drama, the achievement itself is almost incalculable. Try to add up the suffering that has not happened because of what those men set in motion. Every painless surgery, every painless childbirth, every painless dental filling for over a century and a half across billions of people. It is one of the largest reductions of human suffering ever accomplished. Stop and really feel that. Before 8046, if you needed surgery, you faced it awake and screaming. After 8046, you could sleep through it and wake up healed. That single change has spared an amount of human agony that is, quite literally, beyond counting. Few advances in all of history have relieved so much suffering so completely, and it opened the door to everything modern surgery can do. The heart surgeries, the organ transplants, the cancer operations, the delicate repairs that save lives every single day. None of them would be possible on a conscious patient. Anesthesia is the silent, invisible foundation beneath the entire edifice of modern surgery. We rarely think about it. It's simply always there. Today, anesthesia is a sophisticated medical specialty. Anesthesiologists are highly trained physicians who don't just render patients unconscious, but carefully manage their breathing, their heart, their whole physiology through the trauma of surgery and wake them safely afterward. It has become extraordinarily safe, a routine miracle we completely take for granted. Think about that phrase, routine miracle. You go to sleep. Surgeons open your body, repair what's wrong, and close you up. You wake up, groggy but fine, with no memory of any of it and no pain during it. To anyone before 1846, this would have sounded like pure fantasy, like magic. And we do it millions of times a year without a second thought. That is the measure of what happened on Ether Day. It took something that had been a defining horror of human existence, the agony of the surgeon's knife, and made it, within a single lifetime, simply vanish. Not cured, not managed, abolished, switched off, gone. So let's give the discoverers their due, feud and all. Horace Wells, who saw it first in laughing gas and paid a terrible price. Crawford Long, who did it first with ether and told no one in time. William Morton, who made it undeniable before the world. And Charles Jackson, who lent his chemistry. Flawed, striving, unlucky men, who together ended an age of pain. There's a monument in Boston near the site of it all, sometimes called the Ether Monument. Fittingly, and perhaps mercifully, it doesn't name a single discoverer. It honors the discovery itself, the ending of pain, rather than picking a winner in a fight that had no clean answer. Maybe that's the wisest way to remember it. Honor the gift, not the giver. And the Ether Dome, that steep little amphitheater at Mass General where it happened, still stands. You can visit it. It's preserved as a monument to that October afternoon in 1846, when a dentist held a glass inhaler to a young man's face, a surgeon made a painless cut, and the whole world of medicine quietly changed forever. It makes you think about how much of the comfort of modern life we simply inherit, without knowing the struggle and sacrifice behind it. You will very likely, at some point in your life, be given anesthesia. You'll drift off and wake up and never feel the surgery in between. And now you'll know that peaceful sleep was won for you at real human cost one October afternoon in 1846. From thousands of years of screaming operating rooms to a routine, painless sleep, that is the arc of this story. A transformation so complete that we've forgotten it was ever any other way. Which is, in its own strange manner, the ultimate tribute to the discovery. It worked so well that the horror it replaced has become almost unimaginable. So the next time you or someone you love face a surgery without fear of the pain of it, remember Edward Gilbert Abbott, lying still on that table while a knife cut into his neck, feeling nothing. Remember the hush of the Ether Dome. And remember a surgeon's 4 quiet words that marked the end of an age of agony. This is no humbug. It was no humbug. It was one of the greatest gifts one generation of humans ever handed to all the generations that followed. And it deserves to be remembered. Not just the triumph, but the tangled, tragic, wholly human story behind it. Let's gather what this story leaves us with. First and simplest, the sheer scale of the mercy. On October 16, 1846, an age of pain that had lasted as long as humanity itself came to an end. That is one of the most consequential single afternoons in all of history, a genuine before and after line in the human story. Second, what it unlocked. Anesthesia didn't just relieve suffering, it set surgery free. By removing the tyranny of speed, it opened the door to careful, deep, deliberate operations and eventually to nearly all of modern surgery. The painless sleep on the table is the foundation beneath the transplant, the bypass, the tumor removal. Ending pain made healing possible. Third, the human tangle. The discovery emerged from many hands over decades. Chemists, partygoers, dentists, a surgeon, and the attempt to award it to one person and to profit from it brought ruin and tragedy to nearly everyone involved. It's a hard reminder that great gifts to humanity don't always reward their givers, and that credit in science is rarely clean. And fourth, the lesson tucked inside it, that the key to ending a great suffering had been lying around, half noticed, for decades. The anesthetic gases were known. Their pain-killing power was on display at parties. The solution existed, it just took someone to connect it to the problem. How many other solutions, one wonders, are lying half-noticed around us right now, waiting for the connection to be made? That's a genuinely useful way to look at the world. The next great breakthrough may not require some exotic new discovery. It may require someone noticing the 2 things we already know, a phenomenon here, a problem there, belong together. Ether waited decades for a dentist to connect. This stops pain. With surgery, causes pain. What connections are waiting now? There's also a quieter, more human lesson. The story is full of people who almost made it. Wells, whose demonstration failed. Long, who did it first but stayed silent. It reminds us that in the tangled reality of discovery, timing and communication and luck matter enormously, and that history's spotlight often falls unfairly. The person who did it first is not always the person we remember. Which is why it's worth telling the whole story, the failures and the first tries and the tragedies, not just the triumphant morning in the ether dome. Because the real history of how we ended pain is richer, sadder, and more human than any tidy version with a single hero, and every one of those flawed, striving people played a part in one of humanity's greatest gifts to itself. So the next time you sit in a dentist's chair, numb and comfortable, or drift off before an operation without fear, take a small moment. What you're experiencing is the direct legacy of that October afternoon in 1846, a gift handed down from a room full of skeptics who watched a man cut open and lie there, peacefully, feeling nothing. It's easy to take painlessness for granted. It's simply the water we swim in now. But it was won. It was fought for, discovered, demonstrated, and spread at real human cost within a single lifetime. And it stands as proof that even the most ancient and universal of human sufferings can, sometimes, be ended. That's a hopeful thought to hold on to. Surgery without pain would have seemed, for all of human history, an impossible dream, as fixed and permanent a part of life as death itself. And then, one afternoon, it wasn't. The impossible became routine. Which invites the question, what suffering that seems permanent and unavoidable to us today might, one day, simply end? The story of Ether Day tells us that the answer might be more than we think. That the walls around human suffering are not always as permanent as they seem. That a connection, a demonstration, a courageous, no-humbug moment can topple a horror that has stood since the dawn of our species. Progress sometimes arrives all at once. And it reminds us to be grateful, deeply, specifically grateful, for the comforts we inherit and never question. Someone, somewhere, at some cost, won them for us. The painless surgery, the numb tooth, the peaceful sleep on the operating table. These are not natural features of the world. They are hard-won human achievements. And behind each one is a story worth knowing. Edward Gilbert Abbott, the patient on that table, lived on afterward. An ordinary man who happened to be the first person in a public surgery to feel nothing. He became a small, permanent part of one of medicine's greatest moments, simply by lying still while history was made around him. And the discoverers, Wells, Long, Morton, Jackson, for all their flaws and feuds and sorrows, gave humanity something almost beyond price. We can hold both truths, that their story ended in tragedy and bitterness, and that what they achieved was one of the noblest things people have ever done for one another. So remember, Ether Day, October 16, 1846, as one of the great dates in human history, the day the screams stopped, the day surgery became merciful, the day a dentist, a surgeon, a patient, and a glass inhaler full of ether ended thousands of years of agony in a steep little amphitheater in Boston in the space of a single afternoon. It was, indeed, no humbug. It was real, and it was one of the best things we have ever done. And it deserves to be remembered, the triumph and the tragedy, the mercy and the mess. The whole extraordinary human story of the afternoon pain left the operating room. There's something profound in the fact that one of humanity's greatest acts of mercy came not from a saint or a king, but from a handful of ambitious, flawed, ordinary people. A dentist chasing profit, a country doctor, a surgeon willing to risk his reputation. Greatness, it turns out, often wears very human clothes. And the good we do can outlast, by centuries, the tangles of our own lives. We began in the age of agony. The screaming operating room, the strap and the bit, the surgeon racing the clock against a patient's pain. And we end in a world where that horror is so thoroughly gone that we struggle even to imagine it. That distance between then and now was crossed in a single afternoon. That's how much one connection, one demonstration, can change the world. That's the story of Ether Day, the end of an age of pain, the birth of modern surgery, and the tangled, tragic, deeply human tale of the people who made it happen. A story of mercy, hard won, and worth remembering every time we're spared. A suffering we never even have to imagine. Stay curious about the comforts you take for granted, the painless, the safe, the ordinary miracles of modern life. Every one of them has a story of struggle behind it, and knowing those stories turns a world you take for granted into a world you can be grateful for. And stay curious about the connections waiting to be made, because the next great mercy, like the last one, may be lying half-noticed all around us, waiting for someone to see that two familiar things belong together. Ether waited decades. What's waiting now? So the next time a doctor tells you to count backward from 10, and you wake up with it already over. No pain, no memory, nothing. Remember the miracle a handful of flawed, ambitious people gave us on one afternoon in 1846. An age of screaming, strapped-down agony ended in a single breath. If Ether Day amazed you, do two quick things. Subscribe so you don't miss the next hidden story we bring back to life. And tell me in the comments, what everyday comfort do you think has the wildest origin story? Then watch this next. The doctor who was so sure everyone was wrong about ulcers that he drank a glass of the bug himself. It's right here. I'll see you there.